I spent months researching these stories, and I discovered something that Hollywood desperately tried to hide. There's a pattern connecting several of these mysterious endings, a dark secret that the studios covered up for decades. When I tell you about victim number 8, you'll see exactly what I mean. But first, let me tell you about the woman whose freak accident changed car safety laws forever. But first, let's start with the tragedy that literally changed how every car in America was built. Jane Mansfield, the blonde bombshell's horrific end. Jane Mansfield wasn't just another pretty face trying to copy Marilyn Monroe. She was a brilliant businesswoman with an IQ of 163, spoke 5 languages, and could play violin and piano. She was also one of the most recognizable stars of the 1950s and 60s. That platinum blonde hair, that infectious laugh, that larger-than-life personality that made America fall in love with her. But here's what most people don't know about Jane. She was incredibly savvy about publicity. While other stars hid from the press, Jane invited them into her life. She understood something that took Hollywood decades to figure out. Fans don't just want to see you on screen. They want to feel like they know you personally. June 28, 1967. Jane had just finished a nightclub appearance in Biloxi, Mississippi. She was exhausted but excited. She had an early morning TV interview in New Orleans that could revive her fading career. The plan was simple. Drive through the night, get there fresh, charm America all over again. Her boyfriend Sam Brody was with her, along with 3 of her children and their driver, Ronald Harrison. They were traveling in a 1966 Buick Electra, speeding through the humid Louisiana darkness on US Highway 90. Here's where it gets terrifying. The road was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. Not weather fog. This was artificial fog from a truck spraying mosquito repellent. The visibility was almost zero. Ronald was basically driving blind at highway speeds. 2:25 a.m. They slammed into the back of that semi-truck near the Riolets Bridge. But this wasn't just a regular rear-end collision. The car went completely underneath the truck, shearing off the entire top of the Buick, like opening a can of sardines. Jane, Sam, and Ronald were gone instantly. But here's the miracle that still gives me chills. Her 3 children, including future Law & Order, SVU star Mariska Hargitay, survived with only minor injuries. They were asleep in the back seat when it happened. And that's probably what saved them. Now here's where the story gets both gruesome and important. The nature of the crash was so horrific that it led to one of the most persistent urban legends in Hollywood history. People claimed Jane had been decapitated, and that rumor spread like wildfire. The truth? Her blonde wig was thrown from the wreckage, and that's probably what started the false story. But Jane's tragedy led to something crucial: automotive safety changes that have saved thousands of lives. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration mandated that all semi-trucks be equipped with rear underride guards. Those metal bars you see under big rigs, they're called Mansfield bars, named after Jane. The woman who'd spent her career being dismissed as just another dumb blonde ended up saving countless lives through her passing. There's something poetic about that, don't you think? Drop a comment if you knew that car safety feature was named after Jane Mansfield, because our next star's ending was even more shocking, and it happened right on set. Tyrone Power, the matinee idol's cruel irony. Tyrone Power was everything American women dreamed about in the 1930s and 40s. 6'1", devastatingly handsome, that perfect profile, and charm that could melt glaciers. He was the ultimate swashbuckling hero, the mark of Zorro, blood and sand, witness for the prosecution. This man defined what a movie star should be. But here's what's heartbreaking. Tyrone carried a terrible family curse, and he knew it. His father, Tyrone Power Sr., had passed away from a heart attack, right on a film set. At 44 years old, the exact same age Tyrone would be when his turn came. By 1958, Tyrone was trying to prove he was more than just a pretty face. He'd done war service, taken dramatic roles, shown real acting chops in Witness for the Prosecution. Now he was starring in Solomon and Sheba, a biblical epic that was supposed to be his crowning achievement. The production was massive, elaborate sets, period costumes, physically demanding action sequences. They were filming in Spain, and the heat was brutal. Tyrone was wearing heavy costumes, doing extended combat scenes under that scorching sun. They were shooting a particularly grueling sword fight sequence. Tyrone had been complaining of feeling unwell, but he was a professional. The show must go on, right? Then, right in the middle of filming, he grabbed his chest and collapsed. The crew rushed to help him. They got him to a hospital in Madrid as quickly as possible. Doctors worked frantically, but within an hour, Tyrone Power was gone. Massive heart attack, just like his father. On a film set, just like his father. At 44, just like his father. Here's the part that makes me want to cry. His wife Deborah was pregnant at the time. She gave birth to Tyrone Power IV after his father's passing, a son who would never know his legendary dad. The studio faced a dilemma. Tyrone had completed most of his scenes, but not enough to release the film. They considered using a body double, but ultimately decided to reshoot everything with Yul Brynner. Can you imagine? Replacing one of Hollywood's greatest leading men because he passed away doing what he loved. The cruel irony haunts me. Tyrone spent his whole life trying to escape his father's shadow, only to meet the exact same fate in the exact same way. But at least Tyrone's ending was natural causes. Our next star's story gets much darker. George Reeves, Superman's mysterious end. George Reeves was Superman to an entire generation. Kids would watch Adventures of Superman and really believe, that this man could leap tall buildings and catch bullets. But George's real life was far more complicated than his heroic persona, and his passing remains one of Hollywood's most controversial mysteries. Here's what most people don't understand about George's situation. Being Superman was both a blessing and a curse. Sure, it made him famous, but it also typecast him completely. He'd been a serious actor before, had a role in Gone with the Wind, appeared in war dramas, but after Superman, Hollywood only saw him as a children's TV actor. Then there was his love life, which was like something out of a soap opera. George had been having a long-term affair with Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix. Now, Eddie wasn't just any executive, he was connected, if you know what I mean. The kind of man who could make problems disappear. For years, this arrangement worked. Eddie looked the other way. Toni supported George financially. Everyone was happy. But then George fell for a younger woman, Leonore Lemon, and broke it off with Toni in 1958. Bad move. June 16th, 1959. George was at home with Leonore and some friends. According to the official story, he'd been drinking heavily, was depressed about his stalled career, and went upstairs around midnight. Minutes later, gunshot. The guests found George on his bed with a single bullet wound to the head. The police ruled it self-inflicted almost immediately. Case closed. But here's where it gets suspicious. First, there were bruises on George's body that suggested he'd been in a struggle. Second, no gunpowder residue on his hands, which you'd expect if he'd fired the weapon himself. Third, the guests downstairs took almost an hour before calling police. An hour? What were they doing all that time? The theories are wild. Some say Leonore ended his life in a rage. She had a temper, and they'd been fighting. Others point to Eddie Mannix, suggesting he had George eliminated as revenge for breaking Toni's heart. And a few think Toni herself orchestrated it out of jealousy. Here's what really bothers me. There were additional bullet holes found in the floor of the bedroom. If George was alone and took his own life, how do you explain the extra bullets? The man who played the most moral hero in television passed away under the most immoral circumstances imaginable. Superman couldn't save himself from whatever happened that night. Quick question. Which theory do you find most believable? Drop a comment, because our next tragedy involves a star whose ending changed aviation forever. Carole Lombard, the Screwball Queen's patriotic sacrifice. Carole Lombard was the queen of screwball comedy, the actress who could make you laugh until your sides hurt while looking absolutely stunning doing it. She was also married to Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood himself, making them the ultimate power couple of the 1930s. But here's what made Carole special beyond her talent and beauty. She was a true patriot who put her country before her own safety. January 1942. World War II was raging, and America needed money for the war effort. The government asked Hollywood stars to help sell war bonds, and Carole jumped at the chance. She went to Indianapolis for a massive rally and was absolutely magnificent. Raised over $2 million in a single day. $2 million. That's about $30 million today. After the rally, Carole was exhausted but exhilarated. The plan was to take the train back to Los Angeles. Safe, comfortable, but slow. But she was eager to get home to Clark, so she made a fateful decision. She'd fly instead. January 16th, 1942. Carole boarded Flight 3 with her mother, Elizabeth Peters, and her press agent, Otto Winkler. The flight made a scheduled stop in Las Vegas to refuel. Then they took off into the Nevada darkness, heading for California. 23 minutes later, Flight 3 slammed into Potosi Mountain, a rugged peak about 30 miles southwest of Las Vegas. The impact was devastating. All 22 people on board were lost instantly. The cause was pilot error. Flying at night in low visibility, the pilot had gained altitude too slowly and couldn't clear the mountain. But there were other factors. The plane was heavier than usual due to wartime restrictions, and the crew was inexperienced with that particular route. When Clark got the news, he was inconsolable. Friends said he aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He rushed to the crash site, desperate to find any trace of his beloved wife. But the impact had been too severe. President Roosevelt himself called Carole the first female casualty of World War II. She'd given her life serving her country, and her sacrifice wasn't forgotten. Clark was so devastated that he enlisted in the Army Air Forces immediately after her funeral. He threw himself into dangerous bombing missions over Europe, and many believe he was hoping to join Carole. Fortunately, he survived the war, but he never really recovered from losing her. The screwball comedy queen had made the ultimate dramatic gesture, sacrificing her life for her country. And her story shows us that real heroism isn't about playing heroes on screen. It's about serving something bigger than yourself. At least, Carole's ending honored her patriotism. Our next star's tragedy was pure Hollywood darkness. Lupe Velez, the Mexican Spitfire's final performance. Lupe Velez was pure fire, passionate, tempestuous, absolutely electric on screen. They called her the Mexican Spitfire, and she earned that nickname with her fierce performances and even fiercer personality. She once set Gary Cooper's suits on fire when she caught him cheating. That's the kind of woman Lupe was. She was also a pioneer. In an era when Hollywood rarely gave Latin actresses serious opportunities, Lupe carved out her own niche. The Mexican Spitfire film series made her wealthy and famous, even if the roles were often stereotypical. She took what Hollywood gave her and made it work. But by 1944, everything was falling apart. Lupe was 36, ancient by Hollywood standards, for a woman who played fiery young lovers. The film roles were drying up. Her tempestuous love affairs had become gossip column fodder. And then came the final blow. She discovered she was pregnant. The father was Harold Ramon, a young Austrian actor she'd been dating. When she told him, he made his position crystal clear. He wasn't marrying her. Not now, not ever. He was 27 with a budding career, and he wasn't going to ruin it for a 36-year-old has-been and her baby. For Lupe, this was catastrophic on every level. She was Catholic, Mexican, and unmarried. In 1944, having a child out of wedlock would destroy what was left of her career and bring shame to her family. The scandal would be unbearable. December 13th, 1944. Lupe had dinner with friends at her beautiful home, Casa Felicitas. Happy house. She was charming, funny, typical Lupe. Nobody suspected anything. After her guests left, Lupe went to her bedroom and prepared for what she intended as her final performance. She had her hair done perfectly, put on her most beautiful negligee, arranged flowers around her bed. Even in her final moments, she was conscious of how she'd look. She was still a star. Then she took 75 Seconal tablets. 75. She expected to drift off peacefully in her beautiful bed, looking like a sleeping princess. Her maid found her the next morning, arranged exactly as she'd planned. She looked so serene, so perfectly posed, that the first police officer thought she was a mannequin. Now there's a horrible, cruel story that Kenneth Anger spread about Lupe's final moments being undignified. It's completely false, invented to sell books. The coroner's report is clear. She passed away exactly as she'd arranged herself. peacefully in her bed. Harold Ramon's career was destroyed by the scandal. Nobody would hire the man who'd driven Lupe Velez to take her own life. He ended up leaving Hollywood entirely, his dreams as shattered as hers. The Mexican Spitfire's final performance was staged with the same care and artistry as any of her films. Even in despair, she remained a consummate actress. Which theory do you think is most likely? Comment below, because our next story involves one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. Thelma Todd, the hot toddy mystery. Thelma Todd was comedy gold, bright, beautiful, and blessed with perfect timing. She held her own with Laurel and Hardy, matched wits with the Marx Brothers, and charmed audiences in dozens of films. They called her Hot Toddy, and she lived up to that nickname in every way. But Thelma's real life was getting dangerously complicated by 1935. She was involved with Roland West, a director who happened to be married to another actress. She was also connected, possibly against her will, to Lucky Luciano, the notorious mobster. Luciano allegedly wanted to use her restaurant, Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, as a front for illegal gambling operations. According to rumors, Thelma had refused to cooperate with Luciano's plans. That's the kind of decision that could get you into serious trouble with the mob. Some said she'd been threatened, told to cooperate, or else. December 16th, 1935. Thelma attended a party at the Trocadero, a popular Hollywood nightclub. Witnesses said she seemed nervous, on edge. She left the party early, saying she didn't feel well. The next morning, Thelma's body was discovered in her car, which was parked in the garage of Roland West's house up the hill from her cafe. She was slumped over the steering wheel, wearing an elegant evening gown and a mink coat. She looked like she'd just fallen asleep. The cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. The official ruling was that she'd either taken her own life or accidentally left the car running. But nothing about the scene made sense. If it was intentional, why was she dressed so elegantly? If it was an accident, how did she end up in a car at Roland's house instead of her own home? And why were there no witnesses to her final hours? The theories are endless. Some say Roland ended her life to prevent her from leaving him for another man. Others believe Lucky Luciano had her eliminated for refusing to cooperate. A few think she was taken out by someone else entirely, maybe a jealous rival or a jilted lover. What's most frustrating is that the case was closed quickly without a thorough investigation. The police seemed eager to call it an open and shut case, which makes you wonder what they didn't want to find. Hot Toddy's final mystery remains unsolved almost 90 years later. The comedy queen who'd made millions laugh took her secrets to the grave. But Thelma's mystery pales compared to what happened to our next star, Hollywood's first great scandal. Olive Thomas, the Ziegfeld Girls' Parisian tragedy. Olive Thomas was one of those rare beauties who seemed touched by magic. A Ziegfeld Follies girl who transitioned to silent films, she had everything: stunning looks, natural charisma, and a marriage to Jack Pickford, brother of Hollywood royalty Mary Pickford. But Olive and Jack were living on the edge, and Paris in 1920 was the perfect place to fall off. They were in the City of Light for what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Instead, it became a non-stop party. Olive and Jack were both heavy drinkers, and Paris in the Jazz Age was paradise for people who wanted to live without limits. September 5th, 1920. After a night of club hopping in Montmartre, Olive and Jack returned to their suite at the Hotel Ritz. They were both intoxicated, possibly fighting. Their marriage was as tempestuous as it was passionate. Sometime in the early morning hours, Olive ingested a lethal dose of mercury bichloride, a highly toxic substance that Jack had been prescribed for syphilis treatment. Mercury bichloride was commonly used as a topical disinfectant, but it was deadly if swallowed. The details of what happened are murky. Did she mistake the bottle for medicine in the dim hotel lighting? Did she take it deliberately during a moment of despair? Or, and this is the darkest theory, did someone else give it to her? When Olive realized what she'd consumed, she screamed, "Oh my God!" and collapsed. Jack called for help, but it was too late. The poison was already destroying her body from the inside. She lingered for 5 agonizing days in a Parisian hospital while doctors tried everything to save her. But mercury poisoning is one of the cruelest ways to pass away. She suffered terribly before succumbing to the toxin on September 10th, 1920. She was only 25. The French authorities ruled it accidental, but rumors swirled immediately. Some speculated she'd taken the poison intentionally due to marital problems. Others whispered that Jack had played a more direct role in her passing. What's tragic is that Jack seemed genuinely devastated. He remained in seclusion for weeks, reportedly so grief-stricken he could barely function. Whether guilt or genuine love, his pain seemed real. The Ziegfeld girl, who'd seemed to have everything, lost her life to a moment of confusion or desperation in a Parisian hotel room. It was Hollywood's first great international scandal, and it set the template for all the tragedies that would follow. At least Olive's story was somewhat straightforward. Our next case is still debated by conspiracy theorists today. Thomas Ince, the pioneer's yacht mystery. Thomas Ince was the man who invented modern Hollywood. I'm not exaggerating. He created the studio system, the shooting script, the production schedule. Every movie you've ever watched owes something to Thomas Ince's innovations. He built Mansfield, the first major studio facility, and by 1924, he was worth millions. He was also negotiating a deal that would have made him one of the most powerful men in the industry. Everything was going perfectly for the 44-year-old pioneer. Then came November 16th, 1924, and the yacht trip that changed everything. William Randolph Hearst, yes, the newspaper magnate who inspired Citizen Kane, invited Ince aboard his luxury yacht, the Oneida, for a weekend cruise celebrating Ince's birthday. Also aboard were Hearst's mistress, Marion Davies, Charlie Chaplin, and various other Hollywood luminaries. What happened next depends entirely on who you believe. The official story: Ince ate something that disagreed with him, possibly bootleg liquor, since this was prohibition. He developed severe indigestion, was taken ashore in San Diego, went home, and passed away 2 days later from heart failure. Natural causes. Case closed. The whispered story that's persisted for a century. Hearst caught Marion Davies in a compromising position with Charlie Chaplin. In a jealous rage, he grabbed a weapon and fired in the dark. He hit Ince by mistake. Here's what makes the second story believable. Ince was cremated immediately with no autopsy, highly unusual for a sudden passing of a healthy 44-year-old. The official paperwork was signed by a doctor who wasn't present when Ince passed away. Every person on that yacht developed convenient amnesia about the weekend's events. Most tellingly, Luella Parsons was allegedly on the yacht. She was a struggling gossip columnist at the time. But right after Ince's passing, Hearst gave her a lifetime contract that made her the most powerful gossip columnist in Hollywood. Hush money? Hearst also supposedly set up a trust fund for Ince's widow, Nell. She lived comfortably for the rest of her life and never, ever spoke about that weekend. The district attorney of San Diego started to investigate, then suddenly stopped with no explanation. The case was closed permanently, so we'll never know the truth. Did the man who built Hollywood pass away from natural causes, or was he the victim of a cover-up involving the most powerful media mogul in America? What do you think happened on that yacht? Drop a comment with your theory, because our next star's story involves a mystery that's even more baffling. William Desmond Taylor, the director's unsolved case. William Desmond Taylor was one of the most respected directors in silent Hollywood. Sophisticated, cultured, the kind of man who elevated every project he touched. He was also living a complete lie, and when someone ended his life in 1922, the investigation exposed secrets that rocked Hollywood to its core. February 2nd, 1922. Taylor was found in his Los Angeles bungalow, no longer alive from a single gunshot wound to the back. At first glance, it looked like he'd suffered a heart attack. He was fully dressed, sitting peacefully in his chair. It wasn't until they moved the body that they found the bullet hole. The investigation quickly became a circus. Taylor, it turned out, wasn't even William Desmond Taylor. He was William Cunningham Dean Tanner, an Irishman who'd abandoned his wife and daughter in New York years earlier to reinvent himself in Hollywood. The suspect list was like a Hollywood directory. Mabel Normand, the comedy star, had been one of the last people to see Taylor alive, and she was struggling with substance dependency. Mary Miles Minter, the sweet young actress, was secretly in love with Taylor and had been having an affair with him despite being much younger. Then there was Mary's mother, Charlotte Shelby, who was furious about the relationship and had allegedly threatened Taylor. Taylor's former valet, Edward Sands, had been stealing from him and had disappeared months earlier. Even Taylor's business manager was under suspicion. Here's what makes it even more mysterious. Someone had clearly searched Taylor's house before the police arrived. Important papers were missing. and there were signs that someone had been looking for something specific. The case was never solved, despite numerous investigations over the decades. Each suspect had motive, means, and opportunity, but there was never enough evidence to charge anyone. What's truly tragic is how the scandal destroyed lives beyond Taylor's. Mabel Normand's career was ruined by the association. Mary Miles Minter never recovered from the publicity. The whole affair led to Hollywood's first major moral crackdown, with studios imposing strict behavioral codes on their stars. The sophisticated director, who'd seemed to have everything together, was living multiple lies. His demise exposed Hollywood's moral hypocrisy and changed the industry forever. But Taylor's mystery was at least investigated thoroughly. Our next star's ending was covered up almost immediately. Jean Harlow, the Platinum Blonde's medical mystery. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original platinum blonde bombshell. Sultry, funny, and absolutely magnetic on screen. She could make you laugh and break your heart in the same scene, which is why stars like Clark Gable loved working with her. But behind that dazzling smile, Jean was fighting a fatal illness that nobody understood. Jean was filming Saratoga with Clark Gable when people started noticing she looked different. Pale, swollen, exhausted. At first, everyone assumed she had the flu. But as filming progressed, it became obvious something was seriously wrong. Her breath had a strange, sweet odor. She was retaining water so badly that her face looked puffy. The back pain was so severe she could barely stand between takes. But Jean was a professional. She kept working, kept smiling, kept pretending everything was fine. By late May, Jean's condition was critical. When she was finally hospitalized, doctors diagnosed acute kidney failure, then called uremic poisoning. In 1937, there was no treatment for kidney disease. Once your kidneys failed, that was it. June 7, 1937. Jean Harlow passed away at Good Samaritan Hospital. She was only 26 years old. The official cause was kidney failure, but the circumstances led to widespread speculation. One theory suggested her illness resulted from a botched medical procedure. Others believed that a childhood case of scarlet fever had weakened her kidneys. The most persistent rumor blamed her mother, a devout Christian Scientist who allegedly refused proper medical treatment until it was too late. What's heartbreaking is that Jean's final days were reportedly filled with excruciating pain. MGM tried to control the narrative, claiming she passed away peacefully, but the reality was much harsher. The studio was so determined to complete Saratoga that they used body doubles and creative editing to finish the film. It became a massive hit, partly due to public fascination with Jean's tragic passing. The platinum blonde, who defined sensuality for an entire generation, lost her life to a condition that might be treatable today. Her passing was a reminder of how fragile life could be, even for those who seemed larger than life. At least Jean's illness was natural, if mysterious. Our next star faced something far more sinister. Robert Walker, the sensitive actor's fatal reaction. Robert Walker had the kind of sensitive, boyish face that made audiences instantly care about his characters. He was perfect in See Here, Private Hargrove, and absolutely chilling as the psychopathic Bruno in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. But behind that boyish charm was a man struggling with demons that would ultimately destroy him. Robert's personal life was a disaster. His marriage to actress Jennifer Jones had fallen apart when she left him for the powerful producer David O. Selznick. The betrayal shattered Robert, sending him into a spiral of depression and alcoholism that he never escaped. By 1951, Robert was barely holding it together. He'd show up to sets intoxicated, have emotional outbursts, miss appointments, but he could still act. His performance in Strangers on a Train was career-defining work, proving he had genuine talent beneath the troubled exterior. August 28, 1951. Robert had another emotional crisis at his home. His housekeeper, worried about his mental state, called his psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Hacker, for help. Dr. Hacker arrived and decided to calm Robert down with a sedative, sodium amytal, a powerful barbiturate commonly used at the time. But what happened next was horrifying. Almost immediately after receiving the injection, Robert began gasping for air. His body convulsed as he collapsed to the floor. Within minutes, Robert Walker was gone. He was 32 years old. The official cause was an adverse reaction to the medication, but the circumstances raised disturbing questions. Had the dosage been too high? Had Robert been drinking, causing a fatal interaction? Was the doctor negligent in administering the sedative without proper monitoring? What made it even more tragic was that Robert had seemed to be getting his life back on track. He'd recently completed work on My Son John and was talking about future projects. His passing was sudden, unexpected, and completely preventable. The sensitive actor who'd touched audiences with his vulnerability lost his life to a medical procedure that was supposed to help him. Sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. Robert's ending was at least accidental. Our final group of stars faced endings that were anything but. John Gilbert, the great lover's broken heart. John Gilbert was the Valentino of his generation. Devastatingly handsome, passionate on screen, and absolutely magnetic with women. His love affair with Greta Garbo, both on screen and off, was the stuff of Hollywood legend. But when Garbo famously left him at the altar, something broke inside John that never healed. The humiliation was unbearable. Here was the great lover, rejected by the most beautiful woman in the world, in front of all of Hollywood. John turned to alcohol to numb the pain, and that decision would ultimately end his life. There's a persistent myth that John's voice was too high for talkies, but that's completely false. His voice was perfectly fine. The real problem was his deteriorating relationship with MGM head Louis B. Mayer, who seemed determined to destroy John's career out of personal spite. By the early 1930s, John was drinking heavily every day. His once handsome face became bloated and red. His hands shook during filming. He'd forget his lines, miss his marks, and sometimes couldn't even stand up straight between takes. January 9th, 1936. John suffered a massive heart attack at his Beverly Hills home. He was only 38 years old, but years of alcohol abuse had destroyed his body. When paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. The great lover passed away alone, his heart literally broken by rejection and alcohol. His final film, The Captain Hates the Sea, was ironically appropriate. John had been battling his own sea of troubles for years. Sometimes the most romantic figures have the least romantic endings. John Gilbert loved too deeply and never recovered when that love was rejected. Rudolph Valentino, the Latin lover's shocking end. Rudolph Valentino was Hollywood's first great sex symbol. The Latin lover who made women swoon worldwide. The chic, blood and sand, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. He was exotic, mysterious, and absolutely irresistible to audiences. But in August 1926, at the absolute height of his fame, Rudolph collapsed at the Hotel Ambassador in New York City. He was only 31 years old and seemed to be in perfect health. What happened next shocked the world. Doctors diagnosed acute appendicitis and gastric ulcers. Emergency surgery was performed, and for a few days, it looked like he'd recover. Then complications set in. Peritonitis, a deadly infection of the abdominal cavity. August 23rd, 1926. Rudolph Valentino succumbed to his illness after days of excruciating pain. The official cause was peritonitis, following a perforated ulcer. Tragic, but not uncommon at the time. What followed was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. When news of his passing broke, mass hysteria erupted. In New York, riots broke out as thousands of grieving fans tried to see their idol one last time. Some fans even took their own lives, unable to cope with the loss. Over 100,000 people attended his funeral. The funeral home was draped in black, and his body was displayed in an open casket for public viewing. A mysterious lady in black began visiting his grave annually, earning legendary status herself. Conspiracy theories swirled. Some claimed he'd been poisoned. Others believed a cursed ring he owned had sealed his fate. But the truth was simpler and sadder. The great lover's body had simply failed him at the worst possible moment. Valentino's passing marked the end of Hollywood's first great romantic era. No one who came after could quite capture that same mysterious magnetism. Virginia Rappe, the party girl's scandalous end. Virginia Rappe's name is forever linked to one of Hollywood's earliest and most scandalous mysteries. She was a struggling actress who attended a party that would end her life and destroy Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle's career in the process. September 5th, 1921. Virginia attended Arbuckle's lavish party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. She became violently ill during the festivities, suffering from severe abdominal pain. 4 days later, she passed away from a ruptured bladder and peritonitis. The circumstances were immediately suspicious. What had happened at that party? Why had Virginia become so suddenly ill? Arbuckle was charged with her demise, accused of harming her during the party. The truth, however, was more complicated than the headlines suggested. Virginia was already in poor health, possibly suffering from a chronic condition or the results of a botched medical procedure. Some accounts suggest she was struggling with substance dependency, which could have contributed to her sudden illness. After 3 trials, Arbuckle was acquitted. The jury even wrote him an apology, stating there wasn't the slightest evidence connecting him to any crime. But Virginia's passing became a weapon in the moral crusade against Hollywood's excesses. Her name was dragged through the mud to serve a larger agenda about Hollywood's supposed corruption. Virginia Rappe became a symbol rather than a person. Her real story lost in the machinery of scandal and public outrage. The struggling actress who just wanted to make it in Hollywood instead became Hollywood's first great scandal victim. Peg Entwistle, the Hollywood sign's ghost. The Hollywood sign stands as a beacon of dreams, but for Peg Entwistle, it became a symbol of despair. Her story is one of crushed hopes and tragic timing that haunts Hollywood to this day. Peg was a stage actress from New York who came to Hollywood with big dreams. She'd had success in theater, but movies were where the real money and fame were. She signed with RKO Pictures and seemed poised for stardom. Then came the devastating blow. She was cut from her first major film role. Her contract was terminated, her dreams shattered. In Depression-era Hollywood, there weren't many second chances for struggling actresses. September 16th, 1932. Peg hiked up to the Hollywood sign, then called the Hollywood Land sign, and climbed to the top of the letter H. She took her own life by jumping from the 50-foot-tall ladder. Here's the cruel irony that makes this story even more tragic. A letter offering Peg a promising role in a stage play arrived at her home the day after her passing. If she'd waited just 24 more hours, her life might have taken a completely different turn. Peg's ending wasn't just about a single moment of despair. It was about the relentless weight of rejection in an industry that promises everything but delivers little. Her ghost is said to still haunt the Hollywood sign, a reminder of dreams both inspired and destroyed. The Hollywood sign now carries her shadow, a permanent reminder that not all dreams come true, and sometimes the cost of chasing them is everything. Isadora Duncan, the free spirit's tragic irony. Isadora Duncan was a revolutionary artist who defied every convention of her time. She redefined dance as an expression of freedom, rejecting the rigid rules of ballet for something more natural, more human. Her passing was as dramatic and symbolic as her life. September 14th, 1927. Isadora was riding in an open car along the French Riviera, the wind whipping through her famous long hair. She was wearing a flowing silk scarf, a gift from a friend, that represented everything about her free-spirited nature. As the car accelerated, her scarf became entangled in the vehicle's rear wheel and axle. The force yanked her from the car, causing fatal injuries. She passed away almost instantly. The image is haunting. The woman who'd spent her life celebrating freedom and movement was taken by the very thing that symbolized her untamed spirit. That scarf, meant to represent her artistic soul, became the instrument of her destruction. Isadora's life had already been marked by unimaginable tragedy. Her 2 children had drowned in a car accident years earlier when their vehicle rolled into the Seine River. She'd never recovered from that loss, and her passing seemed to echo the unpredictability and chaos that had defined her existence. The free spirit, who'd taught the world that art should have no boundaries, lost her life to a freak accident that was as unpredictable as her art itself. Ramon Novarro, the silent star's brutal end. Ramon Novarro was a major silent film heartthrob, celebrated for his role in Ben-Hur and other epic productions. But his passing in 1968 was so brutal and shocking that it became one of Hollywood's most disturbing crime stories. October 30th, 1968. 2 brothers, Paul and Tom Ferguson, convinced Ramon to let them into his North Hollywood home. They believed the aging star kept large sums of cash hidden there, a common but often false assumption about wealthy former stars. What happened next was a nightmare. The brothers tortured Ramon, trying to force him to reveal the location of money that didn't exist. They caused severe physical harm to the 69-year-old actor in their desperate search for wealth. Ramon passed away from his injuries. The brothers were eventually caught, tried, and convicted, but the damage was done. The gentle man who'd entertained millions had suffered terribly in his final hours. What's particularly tragic is how the media sensationalized his ending, focusing on his private life rather than the heinous crime itself. Ramon's story highlighted the vulnerability of aging stars, many of whom lived alone and were targeted for their perceived wealth. The silent screen's Ben-Hur met his end not in epic battle, but as the victim of senseless violence by criminals who destroyed a life chasing money that was never there. Harry Houdini, the escape artist's final mystery. Harry Houdini seemed invincible, the master escape artist who'd defied the impossible countless times. He'd escaped from water tanks, straitjackets, and even being buried alive. But his final performance would be his most mysterious and his last. October 1926. While on tour in Montreal, Houdini was visited in his dressing room by a college student who'd heard about the magician's famous claim that he could withstand any blow to the stomach. Before Houdini could prepare himself properly, the student struck him multiple times in the abdomen. The blows ruptured Houdini's appendix, but being the consummate showman, he continued performing despite excruciating pain. For days, he took the stage night after night, his body slowly poisoning itself from the internal damage. October 31st, 1926, Halloween, appropriately enough. Houdini succumbed to peritonitis in a Detroit hospital. He was 52 years old. What's often forgotten is that Houdini's passing wasn't just a freak accident. It was the culmination of years of physical punishment his body had endured for his art. His relentless pursuit of pushing human limits had weakened him, making him vulnerable to what should have been a survivable injury. The man who'd spent his career escaping from impossible situations couldn't escape his own mortality. Even the greatest escape artist couldn't escape the final curtain. Houdini's story reminds us that there's always a price for greatness, and sometimes that price is the ultimate one. The pattern revealed. Many of these mysterious endings were either covered up by the studios or involved people with connections to organized crime or corrupt officials. Thomas Ince's yacht incident involved a media mogul powerful enough to silence investigations. Thelma Todd was connected to Lucky Luciano. George Reeves was involved with the wife of a studio executive with mob ties. But there's another pattern too: the complete lack of mental health support in Hollywood's golden age. Peg Entwistle, Lupe Velez, and others were struggling with depression, rejection, and despair, with no professional help available. The studios cared about their stars' box office value, not their emotional well-being. Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about glamour and dreams. It was a place where powerful people could make problems disappear, where investigations were shut down, where truth was whatever the studios decided it should be. It was also a place where human beings were treated as commodities, discarded when they were no longer profitable. These stars didn't just lose their lives, they lost their ability to tell their own stories. The circumstances of their endings became the only things people remembered about them. From freak accidents that changed automotive safety to mysterious circumstances that remain unsolved today, these stories remind us that fame can't protect you from tragedy. Behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood's golden age were real people facing real dangers, some natural, some all too human. Which story shocked you most? Was it Jane Mansfield's accident that led to life-saving safety changes? George Reeves's mysterious ending that's still debated today? Or Thomas Ince's yacht incident that might have involved the most powerful man in the media? These legends deserved better than the tragic circumstances that claimed them. But their stories serve as reminders of both the fragility of life and the importance of seeking truth, even when powerful people want it buried. These legends deserved better than the tragic circumstances that claimed them. And the best way to honor their memory is to make sure their real stories are never forgotten. By subscribing, you're joining a community that refuses to let Hollywood bury the truth. We're going to keep investigating, keep questioning, and keep the memory of these incredible talents alive. Hit subscribe if you believe these stars deserve justice, even if it's just the justice of being remembered truthfully.